Let's get started. Thank you for attending today's EnRoute webinar. Today's presenter will be Aaron Clapp. Aaron is in charge of all training here at SAI, and he knows everything there is to know about EnRoute. So today he's going to be talking about advanced nesting in EnRoute. I'll probably go over that for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. So as he's doing the presentation, if you have any questions, just feel free to jot them down in the chat window there. Or if you have any other questions about EnRoute, go ahead and type those in and we'll answer as many of those as we can. And we will be recording the webinar as usual. So if you have to step out or you'd like to review it later or share it with someone else, we'll be posting that to our YouTube channel and we'll send everyone an email with the link in it. And I think that's about everything I've got. So I'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right. So today we're talking about the advanced nesting. And so we want to just kind of go over the different features and just kind of walk through nesting in general with you guys. I'm going to go a little bit quick because there's going to be a lot of things to kind of cover, but I think you guys will catch on real easy or you'll know what I'm doing. So one of the first things we want to address is this advanced nesting, or the nester, advanced nester is available in the subscription version of the software. If you happen to have a version of EnRoute Plus or EnRoute Fabrication that doesn't necessarily have this option built into it, it's an option that you can add to your license. So it's something that can be added if you want that added to your license. So if you like what you see here and you don't have this particular option, if you're using basic, any really other version, you can also get this added on. So even if you are running a lower version, it is an add-on that you can get. So let's just go ahead and start with the different nesters that you'll see. So first of all, let's get some shapes on screen here. And we'll just work with some general stuff here. Okay, so we're just going to work with some basic shapes here to kind of illustrate the purposes of the nester. One of the things is you will go to your transform menu and you'll find the nesters under nest. So you've got a dynamic nest, view nest report. We'll be looking at this here in a second, and then your regular nest. The dynamic nest is the typical nest that you will see in some of your lower versions of EnRoute, like EnRoute Fab or Basic or something like that. So it's more of a manual nester. The one that we want, though, is the regular nest. So when we click Nest, it's going to bring up this little dialog box down here at the bottom. Now, one thing to note is that before you nest, you want to have your parts you're going to nest outside of the plate. So the red bound box here is going to be the material that you're cutting this out of. In this case, it happens to be a 4x8 sheet of material. Doesn't have to be that. It can be, 20 by 20, 30 by 20, whatever your material is, it doesn't matter. So for now, we're using 4x8 sheet. I've placed all my objects on the outside. Now, one of the things I can do here is I can actually nest these without a toolpath or with a toolpath. One of the things that I like to do is I prefer to nest with the toolpath. Then that way I don't have to think about how much spacing I have to provide for the software in my nest, so that when I go to toolpath these objects, I don't have to worry about that. Now, this especially rings true if you have a different toolpath for each one of these shapes. Now, realistically, if you're doing cabinet parts and other things, you're probably using the same tool. But if for whatever reason you are using a different tool for each different shape, then you would want to go ahead and toolpath these first and then nest them, because then once they're nested, you don't want to have to try and select each and every one of these individually and then cause a problem there. That would just take you too much time. So I'm going to go ahead and just throw a quick routing offset toolpath on this with a 1/4-inch end mill here. It doesn't really matter what we do, just as long as you have a toolpath. So we have a toolpath on here. I'm going to go ahead and select the items that I want to nest. So it's only going to nest the items I have highlighted. And I'm going to use my little shortcut over here and click the nest button. Now, when I do this, obviously these turn pink. What this indicates is this tells us that these are the object that you intend to nest. I can change all the settings for my nest down here below. Now, the nice thing is here is if I want to, I can say I want 10 of these, and it will nest 10 of each copy. Now, let's say I only want 10 of the square, and I want a different quantity of the circle and the star. Well, I can do that by simply while I'm in my nesting screen here, I can simply left click on the item I want to highlight, and the other ones turn brown or greenish or gray, kind of whatever color that is. So we have this one that's pink. We are currently editing this particular object. Now, the nice thing is that the only two settings that apply are going to be these two right here, the quantity and the priority order. So I can tell this to be 10. I can click on this one and tell this one to be 12, and maybe I only need 5 of these. Now, when I go back and click on each one of these, you'll notice that those settings change. So as I go back and click on each one of these, those settings change. So now I can highlight all of them. You'll notice that the quantity kind of blanks out here. That's because they're all different. Now I can set my gap margin, so I can tell it how far apart I want these to be. So maybe 0.125 inches, and maybe the margin. The margin is from the edge of the plate. Maybe I want it to be a 1/4 inch. I can set those separately. The priority order, this is basically allows you to define what is considered to be your priority in terms of what items you want nested first. So a higher priority, so a priority of 1, gets a higher priority, and it will nest that object first. So for example, let's say you have a bunch of little pieces and a really large piece. Well, you may want to nest the large piece first just to get that and then have it surrounded by the other smaller pieces, not the other way around. You wouldn't want to accidentally have it nest all the small pieces and almost fill up the plate and then have it nest the big piece on the second plate. So this is what we're going to do here. So we can do that individually for each one of these if we want. For now, they're all base set at 5. That's just kind of your lowest priority. It just basically puts everything at the same equal priority, and it does everything as efficiently as it can. We talked about our gap and our margin. The nest originals. Now, by default, this one is unchecked, and this is just kind of more of a tip more than anything else. I prefer to have this option unchecked. And the reason why is if I were to hit nest, and let's just check it, and we're going to not do multiple sheets, and we'll just hit apply. Okay, well, let's just say what I don't like that nest. I'm like, well, I can add a few more. I could make a few more copies. I might as well. Maybe I'll add a few other copies just to take advantage of the rest of the sheet. Well, now, because I nested the originals, I have to grab each one of these, drag it out, and then grab this and delete it. That's a step I don't want to have to take. If I don't like my nest, I can just simply go back into my nester, choose to undo the multiple nests. Let's just say we do 10 of each. Apply. I don't like that nest. All I have to do is select those, delete it. I can come right back in here, change this to 20, and apply it. So I can really quickly and easily change my nest if I don't like it. So that's kind of just a little pro tip on my end. I prefer to have mine not nest the originals so that, and this can be very, very helpful, especially if you have like maybe 10 or 15 different objects. You don't want to have to reselect those different objects every single time when you do that. So just makes that process a little bit quicker for you. So let's leave these at 10. We can set this at multiple sheets. So actually, let's put these at 30 so that there's 30 copies of each. If I set to multiple sheets, this will create multiple layers for me to access. So once it fills up one sheet, it'll cycle to a new layer, create a new sheet, start nesting until it fills it up, and it'll keep doing that until it reaches its end. We're going to talk about the remnant and the summary here in a second, so we'll skip past that. This use holes option, this allows me to nest inside of a letter. So let's say I was creating, or one of the things I was creating was some text. Like this, and let's just say I was nesting these objects, and if I use holes, that basically means it'll try and fit stuff inside of here as much as possible, inside of the holes of the letters. So basically, it's just taking advantage as much as possible of the space that it's given. So if I check that option, if it can fit a piece in here, it will. If you leave that unchecked, it will make sure and not do that at all. So that's what the use holes is about. So kind of a nice little feature. It's checked by default. Now we have two interesting settings here. And if you're not familiar with what the step angle is and the nester, these are two different algorithms that, or two different things that we use to affect the way that the nest is handled, along with our diagram over here. So the first of all, step angle. So the step angle is simply how much the object is allowed to rotate at a given time. So as it's nesting, it takes the square or the star, and it can only rotate it in 90-degree increments in order to get the best fit. Now, if you're doing a lot of squares, rectangles, longer, very rectangular type shapes, things like that, you really don't need anything less than 90 degrees because you either want it to stand straight or you want it laying down. There's no real reason why you'd ever want it to be at an angle for any reason. So if all I was nesting was squares, 90 and above would be fine. As I go down, it decreases the amount of angle that it allows to rotate at a single time. So if I set it to 5, every time it takes a shape and goes to put it on the plate, it tries to rotate it in 5-degree increments to see what the best location or the best placement of that object is going to be. That's going to be really good for objects like this star and things like that that have crevices where another piece could easily fit inside of here as we nest. And so that's when that's going to be helpful. Now, there is a little bit of a penalty that comes to the lower step angle. Typically, the lower the step angle, the more or the longer it's going to take to nest. Now, if we're nesting something like this, for example, let's say if I set this to 1 degree and I set this to 10 copies and hit apply, it took a little bit of a second there, so not too long, and this is a pretty easy job for it to process. But if we do the same thing and set it to 90, we set these to 10 again, it's almost instantaneous. So you noticed a little bit of a delay when we set it to 1 degree. So now compound that to, let's say you're making like 50 or 60 copies of each of these. Then you can all of a sudden see how that could turn into minutes, and things like that. So it could be 5-6 seconds nesting time versus 2 or 3 minutes of nesting time. Now that might not be a big issue for you, and that's not a problem. Great. Go ahead and do it. If you're making thousands of copies, it might be something where perhaps maybe it might's not worth your time. Now, what I would say about the nesting angle is I have found that between 45 and 15 is probably your sweet spot for nesting. I would say that when you get to 15 or below, you really don't get that much more usefulness out of the nester. It's almost like you have the ability to do it, but it really doesn't gain you that much power or that much more material. So I would say that for the most part, if you're sticking within the 45 to 15 degree range for very unique shapes, you're probably going to be just fine. And then if you're running more like squares and rectangles, 90 and above will do you good. So just know that that's what this does. The nester, this is just an algorithm that we use in order for the software to determine what it's going to do and how it's going to place those objects. So the standard is your basic one. This is one that we developed in EnRoute 5 and was a upgrade from the legacy. So the legacy is essentially, it's a nester that we brought over from EnRoute 4 and older. So it's a really older nester, but sometimes there are some folks that like to use this versus some of the newer stuff because it seems to work better for them, or they're just familiar with that nesting algorithm. Now, can I tell you exactly what the differences are in terms of how it's going to nest? Not really, but there's a mathematical algorithm that it uses in between these ones. The standard, like I said, is kind of your base level one. And then the new is the most recent one that we've added in EnRoute 6. So the new gives us a few new options, whereas the standard does not. So let's take a look at what the standard does. You'll notice that the obstruct button is unchecked. That is a feature that's solely set to the new. And then you'll also notice that when we select our directions here, so this tells the software which corner or which area we're supposed to be nesting from. It only allows us to choose one. If we flip to the new, now the obstruct option is available, and it allows us to actually select more than one of these objects here, which actually can make a huge difference in the way that it nests. So if we select the bottom left-hand corner and we choose this one here, what it's going to focus on is this corner and then nesting down to the bottom first and then work its way up this way. Whereas if I only check this one, it's going to focus on piling stuff up in this corner and then increasing it out this way. So a slight difference in maybe the way that you see it, but it could make a huge difference in the way that the organization happens as it nests. So a slight difference there, but the potential is great there. You can also add from the middle. So you can nest from the middle outwards. Now that's not terribly efficient. Usually it doesn't give you great results, but if there were whatever reason you needed to start from the middle and work your way outward, that's an option. So you have a little more flexibility. So the obstruct option, what's that? Well, let's go ahead and set up an obstruction. Let's say you have a big 4x8 sheet and I don't know, let's say that it fell off the rack when we were unloading it from our stack or whatever, and it damaged a big section of the material. So let's just say that this whole section of the material down here is unusable. Maybe there's a crack in it or whatever the case. Maybe the edge quality is just really terrible and you don't like it, or maybe there's a bunch of knots over here, something. Let's just say something happened and we didn't like it. In fact, why don't we put several zones here? Let's just say there's a really bad knot section right in here that you don't like. So now we've got two sections here that we can consider obstructions. So I'm going to highlight everything. I'm going to highlight the objects I want to nest plus my obstructions. When I click on here, my obstructions are going to turn red, and I'm going to put a quantity of 10, and we're going to say new, use the obstructions, and we're going to hit apply. And now what this has done is this has nested around my obstruction. So whatever was bad with this material and whatever I didn't like about it, whether it was damaged or weak or had knots or whatever the case was, now it's nested all the way around this section and it's avoided that completely. So this can be really, really helpful. This, I've actually had several customers using this on smaller machines that don't have vacuum tables. So they have actually placed, so guys who are using smaller machines with no vacuum tables that are using, say, clamps or something like that to hold down their material, sometimes they'll put no nesting zones right where they're their clamps are, so that when they nest, nothing gets accidentally placed on where their clamps are at. So another really good use for that as well. So that's what your obstruction does for you. So pretty neat little feature and really easy to use. Okay, so let's talk about, let's do a quick nest with a lot of copies so that you guys can see. Let's just do 50 copies here of each. We're going to say multiple sheets, and we'll just let her rip. Okay, so when you do multiple copies, you're going to see this view. Now, this looks a little bit funny, I'll admit, but what it's actually doing is EnRoute is actually showing you, say, kind of, hey, by the way, I nested multiple sheets. So it looks like everything is stacked up on top of each other, but it's really not. It's actually just showing you all the layers at the same time so that you know that it actually did nest all the shapes. So all I have to do to disable this or turn this off is either I can either go to my layers and turn it on and turn it off, and then it'll do that, or all you'd have to do is switch to a different nested layer. So I can switch through all these nested layers, and now I can see all the layers that were created based on that nest there. So it created 3 layers for me, and actually I think, no, it gave me 4 layers. So it actually used layer 1 as 1, and then nested 1, 2, and 3. So I can see all those shapes there. I'm going to turn on all layers, grab everything, and delete it. I'm also going to go in here, and I'm going to remove all my empty layers. Okay, so now we're just back to normal. So I'm going to grab my objects. Let's take a look at the nesting summary here. So let's go here and create remnant and nesting summary. We're going to say 10. And what we're going to do is run this on the new nester, and we're going to create a remnant. Basically, a remnant is a piece left over after the nest is done. So when I hit apply, for every single layer, it's going to create an extra drawing right here that is basically the leftover piece of the material that you're going to be, that's basically left over for you to use. So this is probably not super useful in terms of what do you do with it? Well, what you can do is, let's say I'm done with my nest. I can take this object, this drawing now, and if I choose this option right here, create plate from selected contour, or you can also get that from the machining menu, plate from contour, this becomes my new plate now. And so because of that, I can now select these objects and I can redo a nest inside of this remnant piece. So if I left this on the table, or let's say that I labeled this piece and put it back on the shelf and then came back to it later, if I had saved this contour, I could save this contour as a DXF and then bring it back in later, and then I can renest this. We'll undo the remnant here, and let's just do 5 and apply. And so now it's going to try and nest everything it can in here. Now in this case, because I had 5 copies, it wasn't able to fit this square in here, and so it just dumped it out here. But I was able to use that and then take advantage of that particular new piece there that I have. So that's the use remnant option. I'm going to start a new file. So one of the things is that there's no real way to store these except for just exporting them as a DXF. So if you do want to store these for later, what I've had customers do is they will, let's say they'll trim this up. This little piece here maybe gets cut off. They'll cut that piece off, and then they'll save this artwork as a DXF file. And then they'll save that DXF file somewhere where they can access it, and they'll label it with a name. And then when they put this sheet back on, let's say an organizing bin or something like that, or some shelves, they can just pull this piece right off the shelf again and say, okay, this is piece number A15 or whatever. I just grabbed that DXF file, load it back into EnRoute, and then you nest right back on that sheet again. Let's look at the summary. So if we click create summary, and I'm going to do the 50 copies again, except for, hold on, I need to copy this and take it to a new file because I don't want that plate. We're going to go here. We're going to do 50. We're not going to nest originals. We're going to do multiple sheets and create summary. So I'm just going to hit apply. We're going to nest here, and then this is going to give me a summary. So in this case, it gave us 4 sheets, just like we had before. But if I go to my transform menu, go to nest and view nest report, it's going to bring up a XML document that shows me each layer and what was nested in that layer. So it's going to give me a picture of what's in there and then how many parts and some data about each nest. So this is kind of a nice thing to be able to print out, especially if you're going to be sending this job out to cut and you have somebody who is going to be keeping track of this. They can say, okay, here's what's on layer number 1. This is what's going to be cut, number 2, number 3, number 4. And now I know what all these sheets are going to be, what's going to be expected to be on this sheet, you know, what I need to do, and it kind of helps you get prepared for it. It kind of gives you some interesting data about how much yield that particular nest gave you on that sheet and things like that. So that is the nesting report. And it's kind of a nice little helpful thing that you get with the advanced nester. Now, one other thing that we wanted to talk about in the advanced nester that we haven't yet is the option for block nester. So most of the time you're going to use the shape nester, and the shape nester is able to recognize the edges of the shape, and that's how it uses its nesting algorithm in order to put these pieces together. So the last thing is the block nester, and this I would say that the thing that's really going to be important for the block nester is going to be the create common line cutting. So let's set up an example for common line cutting. I'm going to take this here and we're going to nest these, and let's just make some different size parts. Make this a little bit wider. So I got something like this. I'm going to go to my block nester. The block nester is basically used for square or rectangular shapes. Objects that are flat, they don't have any edges to them or anything like that. That's what its strength is for. And you'll notice that there's an allow rotate button, but it doesn't allow you to rotate how much. It only will allow it to rotate 90 degrees at a time. That's it. So it's kind of fixed. I'm going to undo this, and we'll undo multiple sheets. But I'm going to say create the common line. So what this is basically going to do is I can set my gap to 0 like this, and let's just make 3 copies of each, and allow rotate and create common line. So we hit apply. All right, so what this has done is this has nested these objects right up next to each other so that the tool paths actually are touching each other. So essentially, we're setting up a scenario so that the tool only has to go through here once. Now you have to nest, something to be aware of is that you do have to nest this with the, you have to nest this with the tool paths on. That's kind of going to be important because it takes the lines of the tool path and creates a new line. So you'll notice this line right here that's kind of, it's now pink in color, but that kind of is outside the boundary here. Well, what this is this is our common line. And so what we're going to do now is we'll take our nest, select it like this. We're going to delete the tool path. We're just going to come right back in here. I'm going to select my common line. And then I can do an engrave toolpath. And the reason why we do an engrave toolpath is because we no longer need to offset anymore because the line is already offset. So we just want it to go right down the middle and follow this line to make this cut. So I'm going to do engrave. We'll just pick our same 1/4 inch end mill, 0.25, and hit OK. Now it's created a line here, and now this is going to cut these out, and you're going to save a little time because now in between these long parts here, we're no longer going to get 2 tool paths. We're only going to get 1. So only one time this is cut in between these sections, this section, and this section. So if you're doing a lot of shapes like this can save you a little bit of time in terms of cutting so that you're not going over multiple sections of cuts multiple times. So that is going to be your block nester, and its primary use is going to be this. So I would say if you're interested in the common line cutting, I would use the block nester if you can. Some workflows it doesn't work as well, but if you're maybe that's not as big of a deal for you, you can also use the true shape nester or the regular nester, and this gets you a really great option as well. So you got your 2 nesters there, and these are pretty powerful nesters that are available in EnRoute 6. So that kind of concludes the EnRoute nesting portion of it. Is there any questions that you have on this or an EnRoute in general that we can go over real quick?
And if you do have any of those questions, just type them into the chat there. Oh, got one. Okay, Zach said, unrelated to the webinar, but recently updated to EnRoute 6.1, and now I'm having issues when exporting to an AF file. It opens blank in Illustrator 2021 and gives an error when opening in previous Illustrator versions. Any thoughts?
Okay, so I do know that just recently there was a new update released for EnRoute 6.1.0.23. So it might be worth checking out is to see if that's an issue. Tech support should have the link to that or have the file. It's just a small little updater. And so that might be worth checking out, giving tech support a call, or maybe just send them an email, and they could probably just send you the link, and then you can just run the updater on your own.
Okay. And then we've got another one. How do we export the nesting? All the layers in one?
So when you export, that's actually a good question. You would end up exporting layer by layer. So if we go back to this and we nest so what we would do is we would just go to layer 1 and we would export this layer. We would go to nested, well, I didn't delete my layers, and so now my layers are all messed up, but where did all my nested stuff go? Anyway, you would just select the layer and then nest it separately is what you would do. It's just output each layer separately. There we go. So there's one layer. We'd output that layer, then we'd output this layer, and then this layer. So we just do each one separately.
Okay, thanks. Then Paul asked, when I am cutting multiple QTR ellipse molding blank that have a groove in them, the nester draws a rectangle around groove, not allowing tight nesting.
Yeah, so that is something that we have run into in the past. So I'll kind of demonstrate that here for you. So what's going to happen is I'm going to go in here and remove all my empty layers here. So we're back to normal. Okay, so let's take a look at this, for example. So let's say that I have I'm trying to think of a good way to do this. I think if we go like this, and then we apply an engrave toolpath to this, and we select it and nest. Okay, so yeah, this perfectly illustrates the problem. It's not a great example, but so here's what happens is when you go to nest, it's looking for the boundaries of an object. Now the problem is with this object, right here, even though it's inside of this object, it doesn't really know what to do with it. So because it's an open contour, and that's probably what's happening in your case, is somewhere there's an open contour, and when it does an open contour, since it's not able to trace inside the shape, it just says, okay, so what's the max height and the max width? And then it just places a boundary around the max height and width of that particular object in order to accommodate it for nesting. And so that's what's basically happens there. I want to say that if we group it, it does this, it helps a little bit, but not enough. So it now considers them to be one piece, but it still is got these little protruding sections out here. So that's probably what you're running into in that particular scenario, is we have an open contour that's causing a problem with that. And as of yet, I don't know a real great way around that, other than to close contours if possible. But I know in some cases it's really not possible. So that might be an issue. Now, if yeah, so that that is definitely an issue. So be aware of that, and I think that's what's going on there. Like I said, I don't have a real great solution for you. There are some cases where you could. So in this particular instance here, what I could do is, instead of using a line, I could delete this toolpath. Oops, everything is ungrouped or grouped. So let's do ungroup, grab this, delete the toolpath. And here's what I could do is I can create a rectangle or a closed contour. So what I would end up doing is create, let's say that this is supposed to be cut with a 1/4 inch end mill. I would do an outline of 0.125 on this side. We would do a square. And then I would do an inline on the same line, same amount, apply. And then I would close this up. So then I would delete this line. And I know this is kind of like really involved and kind of tedious, but now I have basically created the same cut essentially in this shape, and I could merge these together. So I can merge these together, and then I could just do an island fill on this. So that's one way. Now, again, that's not going to work in every circumstance. So you kind of have to be careful there a little bit. But it could be a potential solution. So now if I island fill this with the same 1/4 inch end mill, it's essentially going to run a cut right down the middle. Now it's going to double your time because because the way an island fill works, it goes all the way around the edges. So it will go all the way around like that. But when we go to nest, it now treats those as independent objects. So that's, in some cases, you can use that method to fix that problem if it becomes like a real issue. Sometimes that's not going to be a good solution though. So yeah, so hopefully that helps. If not, then unfortunately there's not much we can do in that case. But hopefully that'll kind of get you out of a bind every once in a while.
Okay, thank you. And then we had one more question. Dwight said, when you made the 2 rectangles and used the obstruct button, how did it recognize those as obstructions? It looked like you selected everything and they automatically turned red.
Yeah, so anything that you have inside of the plate when you do an obstruction, so anything that I draw in here, now notice that I didn't put any toolpaths on these. I left them untoolpathed. So when I highlight everything, because when you go to nest, all the things that you want nested are supposed to be outside of the plate. And so they're supposed to be out here anyways. So anything that's inside or contained within the plate is now going to be considered an obstruction when I hit the nesting button. So I highlight everything, and when I hit nest, because these two objects were inside of the plate when I hit the nest, it automatically says, oh, that's an obstruction. So if I were to put one of these parts inside there, it would register those as an obstruction as well. But because they're out here, it knows that, okay, this is outside of the plate. It doesn't matter where they are outside of the plate, but because they're outside of the plate, these are objects being nested, and these are obstructions.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions about nesting or anything else? I think we've covered a lot, Aaron. Well done.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to cover there, but it's a pretty powerful program, and I think you guys, there's a lot of little things in there that you might not have known about, especially the differences between the new nester and the standard. So there's a lot of different things there that may have not been completely obvious to you, or the obstruction that might have been something you've never known before, and that's kind of the idea, is to kind of get those features that may not be quite as well known out in the light, so you guys can use them and take advantage of them.
Okay. Well, thank you, Aaron, for going over all of that. And thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. We will be sending out the link to the recording, so you can check your email for that. And we will send you an invitation to next month's webinar. It will be on February 16th. So it'll be a Tuesday again. And that we'll be discussing using snap tools in EnRoute 6. So Aaron will cover that. And we hope to see you folks next month. Have a great day.
All right, bye.